Thank you so much, Dominic, for that kind introduction, and thanks to all of you from my heart for being here and sharing this moment. This is incredible. So, yeah, being a psychedelic therapist is emotional, and it's also emotional for me to stand here and that we've come this far and to share the hopes we all share and the dreams and all the great work that we're going to do together to change the future for so many persons. So thank you so much. By the way, Dominic, you could also introduce me as the first Norwegian that ever got to travel to the United States to get MDMA and get taxpayers to pay for it in a legal context. So that's what I can brag about to my children and grandchildren, I guess. So I won't bore you with details of the phases of psychedelic therapy. By now you all know it, and the integration phase is the most important, most people would say. And it's also difficult, and it's challenging, and it can be a bit scary, because psychedelics can lift you up, but they can also bring you down. They can really intensify the issues you're carrying, the conflicts, all the suppressed material, so you can get into real deep water with people. And to navigate that space can be challenging. So, of course, integration is about bringing the fruits back to the daily life, and it's about cultivating the seeds you get from the experience, and then keep on attending the garden for the rest of your life. So, we have this notion of the peak experience, but also an enhancement, intensification of pathology. And the relation between working with shadow integration, personality integration, working with the bad stuff that you're shoved under the carpet, versus working with higher realms, transcending the ego versus building ego, is in a way psychotherapy meets spirituality. And Claudio Naranjo has written a great book where he discusses the relationship between them, the healing journey, which I highly recommend. So it's about maximizing benefits, but also to work through the difficult experiences towards integration of you as a whole person. I will talk mostly about the latter, and there's tons of issues I won't touch, but there's tons of good literature on this, so you can read up on your own. So, this is you, this is me. This is your mother, this is your father. And one thing that always comes up in psychedelic journeys are relationships. And when you watch this art, you no wonder why. We're so intimately connected to another human being from the get-go. And a lot of stuff is going to happen to that little boy or girl. And there will be hardship. And there is this code within the child that wants to express itself naturally. But then the nature of the child meets the culture of man. And children are completely dependent upon their caregivers. So whatever is threatening their attachment bonds will create anxiety, and those parts, feelings, needs, will need to get suppressed. That's a great defense mechanism. Then these patterns of relating to other people, they get generalized. So you feel you can't become angry at your boss when he does something bad to you, because this brings up unconsciously these memories of being angry as a child and being guilted or shamed or given the silent treatment or whatever. The same is true for when your sensitivity and your needs to be cared for were intended to. You were supposed to grow up, boys don't cry and all this. Then it's hard later in life, when you're in a close relationship, to actually ask for something. I need you. I can't do this on my own. And this is so fundamental, the attachment, for our wiring, that we need to talk even more about it in psychedelic therapy. One could ask, this is building also upon what Christopher said in his last talk, the relational aspects. So, because a lot of mental health issues happen, stems from these early experiences that are suppressed and become unconscious. A disclaimer, I can't back everything I say with RCT data or hard data, and I might also, what I say is of course not true for everyone, but it has been true for every single human being that I ever came close to. You know, symptoms later in life, for the most part, is just a reflection of these early wounds. Wounds with parents, with other close relationships, and also with peers. So, social anxiety, for example, that means you have a wound that happened in a social context. And of course, when you get some trauma or you get dismissed from your peers, you're all alone, then there's tremendous pain inside you. And animals and humans, they have this tendency to always seek homeostasis. Our organisms are incredibly wise. They have developed throughout the millennia, through millions of years. We have only been here some decades, but we tend to put ourselves above. We tend to personalize and think we can control. So when the social anxiety comes, it's the body that starts to try to react to earlier wounds. You are triggered. So what this means is that, and lots of people, or everyone, our personality is partly a genetic disposition, but then also learning history. We need to find a way to navigate, to push certain needs, feelings down, and the more you have to suppress and adjust, the more triggers you will have. So these things happen in relationships, and the hurt, and it can only be also solved in relationships, is a central thesis. So what happens is our society has these norms. We put up very strict norms for how you should behave. And our society is filled with political oppression and religious stigmatization and all this throughout the years, social hardship and so on. So if you fall out of the norm, you can be in trouble. And still, in most countries today, it's allowed to hit your child. Here, it's not allowed, but we are hitting our child emotionally with shame and guilt used as means to control behavior. Of course, this is not necessary because the child only needs to learn to take perspectives. It's not necessarily to control or scare the child because the child has a benevolent psychology. If he just is able to get close enough to people, understand people, you will do the right thing. You will learn to do the right thing. But we carry all these wounds and all this shame, this guilt. We carry loneliness because there are parts of ourselves that never were met. And most of us die with these parts that we always hid. And one of the reasons why we don't talk even more about this is that this, of course, makes the distinction between our patients and ourselves much less. Because we all have these issues. And as a psychedelic therapist, when you start your psychedelic journey, this is something you discover. How much more alike I am, my patients. And when you work through these things for your own sake, it's so much easier to spot it and help others go through the same dark night. And this, of course, has been the healers in all cultures throughout times have been those people, the wounded healers. So, how does also this authenticity, attachment triumphs authenticity, but nature will always try to express itself. No matter how much the nature is condemned by man, it will continue to try to move towards wholeness. Interestingly, etymologically speaking, integrate means untouched. So we talk a lot about what should we do when we do integration therapy, but I think it's much more what not to do. We learn to stop doing stuff. We learn to stop adapt. We need to stop to self-criticize, to take out distance, try to comply, to compensate, to overachieve, to gain value. And to have these medicines, psychedelic medicines, that actually has this innate property, that once you take them, there is this emotional charge that is unconscious, suppressed, it starts to come up. It's the really helping agent, but it can be difficult to handle it if you're not understanding what's going on. So in a way, there are parts of us that are expressed only through our symptoms. And our job in integration, ultimately, when we talk about personality integration, is to integrate these parts, to be able to feel vulnerable, to be able to set limits. If we think about it, when did you feel most depressed, lethargic, hopeless? Was it in a close relationship where you once again got into the same dynamics, ending with this distance, ending with stopping taking initiative to closeness, intimacy, sex, whatever? Where are your trigger points? The psychedelics comes and intensifies the charge, and the organism wants you well. When we get anxious in a fight with our partner or something, our partner is telling us the truth about us, and there are a lot of painful feelings connected to it, but we just feel this unease here, and we defend and we attack or we withdraw. And this uncomfortable feeling here is your organism trying to express itself, but we over-control it. So what we do, we start to over-control by our body, we tense up, and also with our mind, we seek, we rationalize, we think, we move away with our attention. So all these, the ways in which we avoid is getting more clear on the psychedelics. So how can this translate into working with people in integration? So one way to work with this, which I use, is a lot of people come to me because they know I'm involved in this field, and they wonder if we can have some arrangement, they taking MDMA or something and go to therapy with me. So I say, I can't engage too much in those kinds of things, but why don't we apply the principles we've learned through the MDMA-assisted therapy? So, and then we see how far we can get without. So the principles are, you can trust your organism. Your organism wants well for you at all times. It always tries to bring up wounds, and the wounds you carry most often have happened in a relationship, and they will be triggered in relationships, and they will be triggered in the relationship to me as well. So the problem oftentimes is that we're not able to be ourselves with other people. We can't be ourselves fully with other people, and that's hard. So what does it take for two people to sit in a room, me and the patient, and just sit with each other and feel good about each other and feel connected to each other? Let's see what happens if we try to get close to each other and get to know each other. And then all these ways to avoid comes up. There's all these expectations. I need to be a certain way. We need to solve something. So therapy is always when the illusion that there was a problem to be solved in the first place falls. Because maybe you were never sick. Maybe just a part of you expressed itself through these symptoms. As Rumi said, you don't need to seek for love, only to find and seek all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it. So when we sit with each other, we just watch what's happening, if it's possible to reach some kind of contact, and if not, what's the barriers? And then we identify the barriers. And then the psychedelic integration therapist doesn't say, oh, are you like that? Do you start to try to perform or comply? It's like, yes, we are like that. We are taught to be like that since we were kids in this society. This is the way it goes. It's not you. This is culturally bound problems. So, again, broadly speaking, and there are nuances to this, but this is really important. So, of course, when our parents can't accept us and our peers can't accept us, they are first and foremost just carrying our culture in front of us. So, of course, there are more intergenerational trauma in some families, and that's also why some people are extra affected by this. But it's always, how you were met. The problem was not the nature of the child. We never blame a plant for not growing up in the way we want. We respect the plant the way it wants. We just give it fertilizer and water and everything, and we are nature. Our job here is to express ourselves. It's for parents, it's to discover who this kid is. Who are you? And then help the kid understand the design and then live it. If the premise is that we too need to solve a problem in you, then we make this problem. Then we define this problem, and then this becomes a problem. And there's two people digging and digging and digging to find a problem, but you only dig deeper into some ditch. If we break it down, characteristics of the psychedelic therapist. So this is the most important thing. So there's a spiritual teacher, A.H. Almos, who is saying that to enter truth, you need certain things. You need trust and compassion. Because to enter truth is always painful. And nobody in their right minds would enter pain without having some hope, at least, that it will be met with some compassion. So trust and compassion, that's what MDMA does. It builds trust and compassion within yourself, and then the therapist comes with trust to the inner healing intelligence of the patient and a lot of compassion. So you get trust and compassion from the inside and from the outside. And then the body starts to do the work it needs to do. So instead of clinging to the stories you heard as a child about who you are or who you should be, you start to live your own experience. Your organism can finally react to the experiences it has had. And when we're able to enter these emotions that are processed, you find a lot of answers there, because then it opens up maybe context-dependent memories. You go back and feel how it was, and you can see the context in a totally different manner. So, and judging. I need to talk about judging. We place value judgment on everything when it comes to humans. Judging is, and you know what you judge, you can't understand. So when you judge something in you, when I sit with a patient and the patient has a reaction, and immediately he starts judging the reaction. And we notice, you're judging your reaction. And in my experience, we judge what we don't understand. When you judge, you can't understand, but also, when you understand something, it's impossible to judge it. So it's always about understanding your patterns. It's taking yourself out of the equation, looking at the bigger picture. We are all small parts in a larger scheme of things. We're not the main players in this. We're just manifesting nature through us. So we need to get away from this very personalized shame, guilt, and accept that we are all human beings expressing nature in our own way, and that's what we want for each other. I want nothing for anyone else than they express their nature. Also that they respect my boundaries, but they will if we get close enough. So this thing with authentic presence, not imposing technique, is important. And these things are hard. Who's able to do that? You know, who's able to slip your own cultural conditioning? You know, because you have all these pressures when you sit there. You're supposed to perform, you're supposed to have some results, get somewhere, be smart, whatever. And if the two people are there feeling the same, two superegos colliding, then there's a lot of guilt to be exchanged. Whose fault is this? So this is also important. To go into present moment awareness with a client is always key, because the thinking mind, the rational mind can't solve these things. It's part of the psyche. The intellect is part of the psyche. It can't heal the psyche or understand the psyche. It needs bottom-up processes. So to really trust the self-organizing wisdom, it puts this in the traditional client-oriented Carl Rogers tradition, you relate to the aspect of the client that knows everything, because that's ultimately what we see. All the answers are there. You just need to get out of your head, step aside, and let more bottom-up processes come to play. We welcome everything because everything tells a story about you and how you had to adapt. It's not that we search for feelings and we want to get to the core. No, we want to get to the barriers. We want to understand how different parts have helped you survive, but also to look at how they maybe come into play to perpetrate your suffering today. It's not about feeling better, but get better at feeling. Important. So when you start to get in touch with yourself, you can be destabilized. That's part of the process, because you have suppressed things, maybe functionally, but to a high cost. The cost of intimacy, of authenticity, of meaning, of closeness. So it's more about looking into clues of what is already happening and help to sustain attention long enough so the processes can unfold. Because when I sit with a patient, there are things starting to happen in the body, but in just a second, then there are some forces trying to pull away. So it needs a lot of time to be in this space without complying to cultural conditioning and attachment history for these things to start show itself enough. This is also important, building on what Christopher said, to be intimately familiar with these concepts within psychodynamic treatments, because there's a lot of stuff going on, and even though every psychotherapist works relational, it's a good thing to have a very explicit focus on these terms, and it doesn't go by itself. Use the here and now. So, the psychedelic therapist has also been alone as a kid. He's also had to find out a lot on his own. There are continents in his or her soul that is untouched by any human being. And you don't need to be a fully integrated, self-actualized saint to do this work at all, because the medicines is helping. As long as you don't get too much into the way, you can't bring anyone longer than you have gone, but the client can bring himself or herself longer than you have gone, as long as you don't stop it. But it's a big chance that you will stop it, because the intensity of the feelings that people feel, the pain they feel, the anger they feel, it really moves you as a therapist, and you remember the same stuff in yourself. So, you can help a lot of people, but to really be able to, if you go on this journey, this is where, when you work on your own stuff, then you will understand how the psyche works, the principles of the psyche. And I think this is really needed, because it's a bit fragmented, the field today of psychiatry and also the psychedelic field. We look at concepts here and there and we try to define them, and psychological flexibility, for example. And I think if you have some parts in you that you need to keep at a distance, you can run but you can't hide, and it doesn't make you flexible to need to keep out vulnerable feelings, for example, or anger. So the best way one important way to get psychologically flexible is to be integrated, to be able to process everything you've been through, so you can have feelings instead of have symptoms when feelings actually arise. So it's magical work. It's holy, sacred work, one might say. It's beautiful, and integration is also a lot about getting used to having a new life and all the changes in dynamics which goes with that. So in closing, the ultimate goals of integration, drawing upon Claudio Naranjo again: contact with reality, take responsibility for your own life, expansion of consciousness, resolution of conflict into even more encompassing wholes, development of freedom, acceptance, surrendering. Instead of enacting the self-concept you thought to be as a child, you identify with your true essence. So to sum up, the psychotherapist needs to be patient because this takes time and it goes in spirals. But just keep walking. In closing, I would say that yesterday I had an interesting talk, and we can criticize Western medicine despite its advances and the good stuff for being way too much symptom-oriented. This might be especially true for psychiatry. And yesterday I heard about a medicine, I think it's called Lomitil, which is used to prevent diarrhea. And it prevents diarrhea by simply contracting the anal muscle. And when you have diarrhea, you have something you need to get out. And to be fair, it's okay when you are to travel and you can take this, but in psychiatry we keep giving people this medication that constricts, that holds the shit in. But in the case of psychiatry, it's even more serious because it's not even your own shit you're holding in. And it's not even your mother's shit or your father's shit, it's your forefathers' shit. It's the cultural shit we're holding in. It was culture triumphed our nature, and we need to reclaim that. The shit needs to get out. And then we can't operate within all the cultural conditioning. We need to get our minds clear on how we are also affected by this to do the deepest work. We can do a lot of work to break cycles and to treat symptoms and to come far with some people, but this is key to move to the next level. So get the shit out, and you do that by getting out of the way and let the body take care of it. Thank you.